Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ben Tomczyk on behalf of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We have a really exciting program for you today about Social Security, a topic I know many people feel very passionately about. So before we begin the program, I just want to let everybody know that we are recording this program for future use. We'll also be sharing some links through the chat feature. And after both Mark and Stephen's presentations, we do want to leave time to take your questions. You can submit your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Today's program is all about how the public views the options to reform Social Security, and we're really going to have two parts to this program. In the first part, we're going to have Mark Goldwine, who's a Senior Vice President at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, talk about what is the status of Social Security and kind of where is the program headed. And then we're going to have Stephen Kuhl from the University of Maryland School of Public Policy talk about a really interesting poll that they did engaging the public about the options to reform Social Security. And then we'll bring both of them together to have a dialogue about the program, the future, and take your questions. And so now to kick things off, I'd like to introduce my colleague at the committee, Mark Goldwine, who's going to give a brief presentation about the status of Social Security. Mark, thanks so much for joining us, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ben, for that introduction, and thank you, everyone, for being here. Please bear with me for a minute while I share my screen. Ben, can you give me a thumbs up that my screen is displaying?
Yes, you are good, Mark.
Great. Well, what I want to do very briefly, because I want to leave time to talk about this really interesting interactive poll, but is give some context about what's going on with Social Security. And for those watching at home, it shouldn't be a surprise, because basically the story with Social Security has been the same for since at least the early to mid 1990s. What we've known is that Social Security faces demographic pressures. Back in 1950, when Social Security was an immature program, when we didn't have, not all seniors were eligible, there were 16 workers paying in for every one beneficiary. In 1960, when the program had kind of fully matured, but we were a much younger society, there were 5 workers per retiree. That meant that each worker could contribute 20 cents and give each retiree $1. That's a pretty good deal. By 2016, that number had fallen to 3 to 1, meaning now instead of contributing 20 cents, each worker has to contribute 33 cents to give a retiree $1. And by 2035, we are headed to 2 to 1. That may even happen at a faster pace given some recent demographic changes associated with the pandemic and changes in immigration. So what we have with the situation is we are going to be a very top-heavy society by age. And that means that a relatively small number of workers are going to be supporting an increasingly large number of retirees. That has implications throughout the economy and throughout the budget, which we could talk about in another seminar, but in particular, it affects Social Security's finances. Through most of Social Security's history, the payroll tax revenue has been roughly equal to the spending. And then in the 1990s and early 2000s, we actually had more revenue coming in than spending. You can sort of see that area right here where we had the surpluses. But since 2010, Social Security has been running a deficit, and that deficit has been growing over time as revenue remains as sort of a stable share of payroll, but benefits continue to grow. The result is going to be that we are eating into the surpluses from the 1990s. We are eating into the interest that is accrued on those surpluses in the trust fund. And by 2035, Social Security is projected to be insolvent. What does insolvent mean? Insolvent means that Social Security, under the law, will not be able to pay full benefits. The law says Social Security can pay as much as benefits as it can bring in a revenue plus what it has in its trust fund. When the trust fund runs out, we only have the revenue to pay benefits, which means roughly a 20%, possibly 25% cut across the board. That 2035 is only 13 years away. I'm going to scare you a little bit more, which is that these projections were based on assuming the inflation rate this year would be about 4%. Instead, it's going to be about 9% as the COLA is measured. So if anything, it's more likely going to be 12 years away, maybe even 11 years away, but let's stick with the 13 years away projections. We have a tool on our website where you can go and enter your birth year, and it'll tell you just how much trouble you are in if we allow the cuts to be to take effect as scheduled upon insolvency. But I've taken the liberty of recruiting a few celebrities and running them through this model. American Sweetheart, Tom Hanks, he's 65 right now. When Social Security becomes insolvent, he's going to be 78 years old. He's still going to be making movies, but he's no longer going to be eligible for his full Social Security benefits. They'll be cut 20% across the board. Will Smith, right now he's 53 years old, believe it or not. Social Security is going to run out just as he's reaching the normal retirement age. He'll be 66, normal retirement age is 67. His benefits will also be cut by about 20% over his lifetime, which, assuming he had average income, average lifetime earnings, average life expectancy, is about $100,000 benefit cut in real dollars, in today's dollars. This is Kylie Jenner, the world's youngest self-made billionaire. She's 25. Social Security is going to run out when she's 38, and she stands to lose about $175,000. Again, assuming she had average income. This is not a celebrity, but I think she thinks she is. This is my daughter, Juliana. She's 5. She was born in 2017. Social Security is going to run out when she turns 18 years old. So happy 18th birthday, Juliana. Get a job and start saving for retirement, because you stand to lose almost $250,000. So this is a big problem. And as I said, this isn't a new problem. We like to measure the shortfall as a share of payroll, basically how much we have to increase the payroll tax rate to get a solvent over 75 years. Right now, we estimate it's about 3.5% of payroll, meaning the 12.4% payroll tax rate would have to ultimately go up to like 16%. Actually, a little bit more later, but let's kind of go with that even. This is not a new problem. It has gotten worse over time. You can see back in 2010, we thought it was only 2%. As recently as 2015, it was 2.7%. So the problem is getting worse, partially because we are waiting to fix it and there's a cost to waiting, partially because it turns out they've been overly optimistic in the past. But this is a very big problem. And the longer we wait going forward, as I hinted at, the harder it is to solve. If we do this today, we could raise taxes by about a quarter, raise the tax rate by a quarter, cut benefits by about a fifth. If we wait until the deadline, we'd have to raise taxes by about a third or cut benefits by a quarter. If we only want to cut benefits for new beneficiaries, we could cut them by about a quarter today, but it'd be literally impossible to do it if we wait until 2035. You couldn't cut benefits even down to zero. Now, luckily, there are many options to fix this. We can raise the payroll tax rate, change the base or the cap on wages subject to the tax. You can adjust the benefit formula. You can do so in a way that's actually very progressive. You can adjust the retirement age. You can change the cost of living. There are other things you can do as well. And if we take the opportunity to do this in a thoughtful way, we can also rethink retirement while we're at it. Right now, we have a very binary system of retirement. Most people work, and then stop doing the thing they've done every day of their life all at once. In today's economy, that doesn't make sense. It certainly makes sense for some people, but we probably need a more dynamic system where some people retire early because they can't work longer. Some people work much later. Some people phase into retirement. Some people move into consulting or into encore careers or take bridge jobs. We need to give people these more kinds of options, which we know from the literature is going to improve their own wealth, is going to grow the economy faster from the additional labor. And as it turns out, people that work longer on average are healthier, happier. They have lower divorce rates because they're not home annoying their spouse all day. They drink less, they watch less TV, they have more mental acuity, stronger social networks. There are a lot of benefits. And so we should be thinking about this holistically. How do we make Social Security solvent in a way that assures we don't have that cut, that maximizes retirement security for individuals, and ensures fairness, that improves the fiscal situation, and that grows the economy? The last thing I'll hint at is there are a couple non-solutions in the currently in Congress that I want to highlight. One is there's this call to repeal the WEP GPO, which is a special formula for state and local workers. This would be a step backwards. It would make insolvency sooner by essentially allowing certain state and local workers to double dip and get extra benefits. The other is Chairman Larson's Social Security 2100 Act, a sacred trust. Earlier versions of the 2100 Act, it's a very popular piece of legislation, would have made Social Security sustainably, permanently solvent through a mix of new revenue from higher earners and higher tax rates from everyone. And we were extremely supportive. This latest version cut out a lot of the tax increases because they were politically difficult, put in a huge number of new benefit expansions, and had all these expansions expire after 5 years. So it makes it seem like it improves solvency a little bit, but it would be almost inhumane to expand everybody's Social Security benefit for 5 years and then let that go away. So either we're doing an awfully cruel thing to people, or we're setting up a situation where we're actually going to make Social Security's financial situation worse. So I think that reasonable people on the left and right can disagree over what kind of mix of benefit and revenue changes that you want, but you actually want a solution that moves in the direction of making Social Security more solvent and more certain, not one that creates more uncertainty and reduces solvency. And as these countdown clocks show, and you can visit on our website at crfp.org/project/trust fund solutions, time is running out. So thank you all, and thanks, Ben.
Thanks so much, Mark, for that presentation. And if you're interested in learning more about the insolvency countdown clocks that Mark has, I encourage you to click on the link in the chat. And now I'd like to introduce Stephen Kuhl, who is the director of the program for public consultation at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. And Stephen's going to tell us about a really interesting public engagement survey that they did and what they found. So Stephen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Let me start by saying a little bit about the kind of survey that we do. We call it a public consultation survey, or even a policy making simulation. If you may have encountered some standard polls where a majority, you ask people, do you want to address the problems of Social Security? And they go, yeah, sure. Yeah, that sounds good. And then in a separate question, do you want to raise the retirement age? Do I want to raise the retirement age? Well, no, I'd rather not. Do you want to cut benefits? Well, no, I'd rather not. Do you want to increase the payroll tax? Well, no, I'd rather not. Oh, you see, the public's just a big baby. But the question is, what if you actually put them in the shoes of a policymaker? And that's the idea of a policymaking simulation, where you actually give them a briefing on the issues, and then they make an assessment. They come to a conclusion about what to do when they see all the options together and the impact of their choices. So that's the kind of a survey we did. And people, by the way, think this is the best way to get public opinion, and they have more confidence in the conclusions that come from that kind of process. So I'm going to tell you about the results of the survey that we did that went like that. Okay. All right. So just to first tell you about the fielding, and this was fielded in April through May with a represented a sample of registered voters, 2,500. It's a probability-based sample from Nielsen Scarborough. The margin of error was 1.9%. We asked a kind of general question, how they view Social Security, and overall it's quite positive. 3/4 overall said that they had a positive view, and that included more than 7 in 10 Republicans, as well as more than 8 in 10 Democrats. Now, throughout, I'm going to show you the results in very red and very blue districts. We have a large enough sample that we can divide the people 6 ways, depending upon the PVI or Cook rating of the district they live in. So it's broken out 6 ways, from very red to very blue, and I'm going to show you the very red and very blue ends of the spectrum as we go along. So we started by giving them a general briefing on the Social Security program, the amount of the benefits, the progressivity of the benefits, and then we introduced the problem of the shortfall, the time frame and magnitude. We told them that if no action is taken, the average monthly benefit will go down by about 1/4, giving them really the specifics. I'm not going to go over everything we explained to them, but it was not dissimilar to the kind of presentation that we just got from Mark. So now the causes of the Social Security shortfall we explained was changing worker retiree ratio, Americans living longer, seniors as a growing share of the population, and so on. So the process that we went through is we first presented an option, and then which included the scoring for the effect on the shortfall. Now we covered some increases in benefits too that are being discussed in Congress, which we'll show you at the end. And for each one, they evaluate pro and con arguments. They make an initial assessment of how acceptable it is. And then at the end, all of the options are presented at once in one big spreadsheet, and they make their final recommendations. And as they go along, a little bubble follows them around and tells them how they're doing relative to the shortfall. Of course, when they cut benefits or something like that, that reduces the shortfall. When they increase benefits, it increases it. So first, starting with reducing benefits. So one option that we explore that's in congressional legislation is for new retirees only to gradually lower benefits for people who have had higher earnings, and their benefits would still be higher than for people who have lower earnings, but less than people in that income group are currently scheduled to receive. The first argument, these are summaries of the arguments. They're about 1/3 the length of the actual argument, but just want to give you a feel. Wealthier retirees have other ways to fund their retirement, but their benefits are higher than other people. This gap should be reduced. Their benefits are more like others. Well, 61% found that convincing, and about half of Republicans, 3/4 of Democrats. Another argument in favor: the purpose of Social Security is to ensure that older or disabled Americans don't fall into poverty. It makes no sense that wealthier people receive higher benefits than people with lesser incomes. Same number, 61% found that convincing, and half of Republicans and so on. Now, on the other side, reducing benefits based on income would end up hurting some of the middle class, particularly those who live in areas with a higher cost of living. 72% find that convincing, especially Republicans. And workers pay taxes on the promise they get this money back in the form of benefits. Reducing benefits violates this understanding and changes Social Security to a welfare program. 7 in 10 find that convincing. So you see, this is not an unusual situation where they go, oh yeah, well that's a good argument, and then they hear the other side, oh yeah, that's a good argument too. But the question is, what happens when they actually make their final assessment? This is really important to understand too, because when a member of Congress gets up and says either side of this, they'll get people nodding, and they may think, oh yeah, people agree with me. So there's this tendency to assume, that people agree with you. So what do they do? What do they say in the end? Well, they were given a number of options, and 81% chose reducing the monthly benefits for the upper 20% of earners. They were offered 40% and 50%, but that fell below half. And this is bipartisan. 78% of Republicans favor it, 86% of Democrats, and 78% of independents, and larger majorities in both very red and very blue districts. Now, raising the retirement age. We explained that it's on a schedule to go up to 67 by the year 2027, and then we'll stop rising. And the option is to continue to raise the full retirement age on that kind of curve. And we showed them graphs and so on, how that would go, which would reduce the total amount of benefits that people would receive over their lifetime. And the argument in favor, the number of retirees receiving benefits is growing, while the number of workers who contribute to Social Security is shrinking. It's just not affordable for people to retire as early as they have. Well, 53% found that convincing. That's not a big number. That's a good point. People at 66 are healthier than in the past, and most work is less physically demanding, so people can work longer before retiring. Same thing, about 53%. Then on the other side, raising the retirement age is unfair because many workers in their 60s still hold physically demanding jobs. Oh, 3/4 find that convincing. Raising the retirement age is a benefit cut by another name. Lower income people and minorities don't live as long on average, so they draw fewer benefits over their lifetime. Again, remember, this is a quick summary. 7 in 10 find that convincing. So the arguments against were found more convincing. Nonetheless, when it came down to it, when they were dealing with the trade-offs and all the different options, 3/4 chose to raise the age to 68 or higher, and less than half went above 68. And it was virtually no difference between the parties. Turning to increasing revenues, one option very much under discussion is to subject wages over 400,000 to the payroll tax. Explain that currently it's capped at 147,000, and this would create a new level above for income above 400 for wages specifically. And this would reduce the Social Security shortfall by 61%. Well, the argument in favor, the incomes of the wealthy have been growing while the incomes of the middle class have been stagnating. The wealthy should pay the payroll tax all year like everybody else, not just the first part of the year. 8 and 10 find that convincing. Higher taxes will discourage high income earners from working and encourage tax evasion. They will also have less money to invest to create jobs and promote economic activity, hurting the economy. Well, that's a real dud. That just got 36%. And one thing I should mention, we went around and had all this content reviewed by proponents and opponents of all of the options, so that we were sure that the briefing was accurate and balanced, and that the arguments were the strongest ones that were being made. And thus, you find in most cases a majority find both sides convincing. But this one, not the case. And in the end, 81% favored this proposal of subjecting all wages above 400,000 to the payroll tax, and including 8 and 10 Republicans. Another option is to raise the Social Security payroll tax rate. Present, both workers and employers pay 6.2% on the amount of the salary and wages. Self-employed people pay both sides, and the option is to gradually raise the payroll tax rate. The argument in favor, paying a little more now will shore up Social Security, make all Americans more secure later. It's also appropriate for employees to make slightly higher contributions to their employees' retirement, since fewer offer pensions. 2/3 find that convincing. On the other hand, raising the tax rate is bad for employees, leaving them with less to spend and save for retirement. It's also bad for employers because it increases their costs, leading them to cut employees and create new jobs. About the same number, at 70% find that convincing. So okay, in the end, they were offered a range, and they took the majority took the first step from raising it from 6.2% to at least 6.5% over a 6-year period. We gave them higher rates over longer periods, but that did not get majority support, and this would reduce the shortfall by 16%. Now, we also looked at some options for increasing benefits that are being considered, that are in legislation. Explained that the minimum Social Security benefit for someone who's worked 30 years or more is about $951 a month, and the proposal is to raise the minimum benefit to $1,341 a month, and then continue to rise with inflation. And this would increase the Social Security shortfall by 7%. And the argument, the current minimum benefit is below the poverty line. If you work 30 years and pay your Social Security taxes, your benefits should assure that you can retire and not live in poverty. Well, 8 and 10 found that convincing, even 3/4 of Republicans. And on the other side, the shortfall should be solved first, and only then should we consider raising the minimum benefit. Well, 6 and 10 found that convincing, 65% of Republicans. And in the end, 64% favored this proposal, though it did increase the shortfall, including 6 and 10 Republicans. By the way, this is up from a few years ago. This is noticeable, this increase. Another proposal is to supplement the benefits for the very old, for those starting at age 81, and by age 85, the increase would be an extra 5%, which would increase the Social Security shortfall by 5%. The argument in favor that many people in their 80s have exhausted their savings and often need special services. 3/4 find that convincing. On the other side, this is another example of thinking that people shouldn't be considered responsible for their own financial needs. This will discourage people from saving. Only half found that convincing. And though it was overwhelmingly on the side of the argument in favor, only a modest majority favored this proposal, but it was bipartisan, 53% overall, and 53% of Republicans and 56% of Democrats. Finally, the idea of using a different measure for inflation based on a set of goods the elderly tend to buy, and this would increase the Social Security shortfall by 12%. The argument in favor is this doesn't reflect what the current system doesn't reflect what seniors actually buy. 3/4 found this convincing. But hey, people keep coming up with reasons why certain groups should get better, get higher benefits, and we have to look for ways to reduce the shortfall. And yeah, 60% found that convincing, and in the end, 55% favored the idea. And again, it was bipartisan, but more relatively modest. So putting it all together, you see that the large majority support reducing benefits for the top 25% of earners, raising the retirement ages from 67 to 68, and that's bipartisan. Increasing revenues by subjecting wages over 400,000 to the payroll tax, and increasing the payroll tax rate from 6.2 to 6.5%. You put all, and then also though raising the minimum monthly benefit. And that creates when you put all these together, these large majorities, this covers 95% of the shortfall. The ones that got more modest majorities, raising benefits for those over 85 by 5%, and changing COLAs based on goods and services the elderly tend to buy, those together increase the shortfall by 17%, bringing the total amount down to 78%. So that's basically the summary of what we found.
Thanks so much, Stephen. And I'm going to ask Mark if you can turn your camera on as well. And in the few remaining 10, 12 minutes we have left, ask a few questions that we got. So Stephen, first question is for you. Someone wrote in, what surprises you the most when you do the simulation? And are there any lessons learned?
Well, it's always striking when you get a result that's different from a standard poll, you know, like and when people are in a different modality, when they're in a kind of problem-solving mode, you get this result. Now, it's really important though that when we went back with another sample and said, okay, a representative sample went through this process and looked at the options, and here's what here are the proposals that they came up with. Do you agree or disagree? Very large majority say, okay, yeah, that sounds good. Some people like me went through that and they came out that I'm with it. Yeah, that makes sense, right? So it just elicits a different kind of response, and then really the kind of response. And also, if you ask people, how should policymakers, what should they respond to more? What their people's initial response or the response after they've had gotten more information, heard both sides of the issue? And they overwhelmingly say the latter. The degree of bipartisanship is really striking because it's you think Republicans and Democrats can't agree on anything, and yet there was basically bipartisan agreement on virtually every proposal. There were some differences in the responses to the pro and con arguments, but in the end, when people are reasoning through the issues and not just sort of looking for partisan whose team is on which team is saying what, they actually do find quite a lot of common ground, and we found that on a lot of other issues as well.
Mark, I'm going to go next question from you. William writes, is it accurate to equate trust fund insolvency with Social Security program insolvency?
So I think the best way to describe what's happening is that the trust fund will be insolvent. But I also think this is a little bit semantics. The reality of the situation, the trust fund is there as an accounting mechanism so that our revenues over time are reflecting what we pay in benefits. That's no longer the case, or will not be the case in 12 or 13 years, at which point 20% to 25% of the benefits that we've told people they are going to get, they will not get under current law. Whether you want to call that program insolvency or trust fund insolvency doesn't really change those realities much. But I do think trust fund insolvency is the more appropriate description.
Stephen, we had a question about the simulation where when you're presenting the information to people, there may be, especially with a complex issue like Social Security, an inclination for them to just go to what they heard last, right? The last option they heard, especially as you present the pros and the cons. How do you try to factor that into the simulation? and the responses you get from people.
Yeah, we very much did that. It's not like, oh, you get a proposal, what's your response? We had them go through all of the proposals in the pros and cons, and then at the end they were all put together on one big spreadsheet. And the number, the number that I showed you about their final position were the positions they came through at the end when they had all of the options there in front of them. And they had that little bubble following them around, telling them how the impact of their choices on the shortfall.
Mark, I want to direct this next question to you, and not this Stephen, but another Steve wrote in, said, in my view, raising the tax or the cap on Social Security is throwing good money after bad. Are there any serious considerations of a complete reset of Social Security towards creating a true safety net program that focuses on poverty instead of increasing elusive retirement that primarily benefits older and wealthier Americans?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do support raising the cap. I don't think it's the only way to bring revenue in, but I think realistically, a solvency plan is going to have changes to benefits and changes to revenue, and that's I think a fair way to do it. But we should think big, even if the changes we make are incremental. We should think big to think about where we're going to. And I know of two proposals out there that would move Social Security more of a flat benefit that would ensure everybody would get well above poverty benefit, but wouldn't have. But would obviously be a reduction at the top. The one is by a person named Ben Ritz, the Progressive Policy Institute, that's on the left. The other is by a guy named Andrew Biggs at AEI, that's on the right. Their proposals differ in details, but they do both move towards this flat benefit. It's not safety net in that it's not only for poor people. Everyone gets the benefit, but it's a big increase if you're at the bottom and a big reduction for those at the very top.
Mark, I'm going to continue on with you. Had another question. Someone asked about your slides, and they said they noticed that the SSDI trust fund showed a much longer trajectory to insolvency. Why is that, and could that be used to bolster the OAS trust fund?
So let me answer the same question first. We assume in these numbers, that 2035 number I gave you basically assumes that they pull the Social Security disability money into the old age money. So it can help a little bit. I think we could consider reallocating a small amount, but it's not going to make a major change because for two reasons. One, disability is small relative to old age, small number of disabled relative to old age. And the second is, even though it's going to run surpluses, those surpluses are going to be minuscule. The reason for its improvement is multifaceted. This is actually a really encouraging thing because just a few years ago, it was projected to run out of money by 2016. We took some legislative actions that helped extend that, including reallocating the payroll tax, including some changes to the program. We took some administrative actions. There were some judges that were just approving. There were a few really bad judges that were just approving every case. There were fraud rings. There were things where everybody do at SSA. And then luck is maybe the wrong word, but we ended up having a very strong labor market and a strong economy, including through COVID. Often in recessions, people end up on the disability program. Through COVID, because of our generous unemployment benefits, they instead stayed on unemployment and then came into what's now an extremely strong labor market. And so for all these reasons and more, the disability program is looking good right now. But I do want to warn, the economy giveth and the economy taketh away. So we could see it again go into bad times in the future.
Stephen, I want to go next question to you. And when you're looking at the results, talk about how you analyze them, breaking down. Someone specifically mentioned, age and geography. Do you look at, trends there and what that may reflect in terms of what the public views in terms of solutions to the problems you're presenting?
Yes, we do that kind of analysis. And what is most striking about it is the homogeneity of responses across categories. And even with ones that you might expect them to be different, like we made it very clear that with raising the retirement age, some people would be affected by it and others would be grandfathered in. So people knew which side they were on. So we looked at our younger people who would, I forget what the age is, 55 or something like 58, who would be affected by it, more resistant to raising the retirement age than older people who would not be affected by it. And there's a little bit of effect, few percentage points but basically you still have very robust majorities. Same thing on income levels. You would think, well, in terms of raising, lowering benefits for the top 20%, well, probably the people in the top 20% are going to be more resistant to that or oppose it. While the numbers were, again, a little lower, you still had a robust majority in favor of it. So so basically there are really no demographic categories that don't basically support these responses. And as noted too, people in very red and very blue districts were not significantly different.
I'm going to go real quickly. Final questions for you both.
Oh, one thing I should note too, that we do look at the relationship between the how people respond to the arguments and their conclusions, and usually there's a stronger relationship. And it's something that was somewhat unusual in this survey. Well, the cases where you had much more support for the pro or the con argument, or I'd say much more support for the con argument than the pro argument, but then in the end, a large majority still favored it, which really tells you something, that this is not, it's not an easy glide. It's like, yeah, I'd rather not do that. But yeah, I guess that I don't want to see a 0.25%, 25% cut in my benefits or people in general. And okay, yeah, right. So let's do that. So it's and you can see that by looking at the responses.
All right, I'll just build on what Stephen's saying and apply this more broadly to Medicare and the whole federal budget, which is that if your choice is between, do you want everything or do you want more of everything, you will take more of everything, right? But the reality of the world is that there are trade-offs. There are trade-offs within the budget, there are trade-offs outside of the budget. So putting this constraint, you've got to get to solvency or else something bad happens. That allows people to weigh the trade-offs and understand, you know what? I mean, personally, I don't want to work longer or pay more taxes, right? And I don't think others do as well. But if the alternative is, the program's going to be insolvent or we're going to borrow a ton to transfer from general revenue, those are both pretty good options.
Stephen, Mark, I'm going to give you each one final question. But before I do, we had a couple of people ask, are the slides going to be available? Is there going to be a video of this event available? The answer is yes. We'll also include some links to the survey that Stephen was talking about. And I kind of want to end on sort of a broader question.
One on that front too. If people want to go through the policymaking simulation, they can. If you go to the VOP.org, voiceofthepeople.org website, you can actually go and go through the simulation yourself. And in the end, you can put together your recommendations and then enter your address and send them off to your congressional representatives. You might, and anybody can do that. People use it in schools and things like that. .org.
Great. And yeah, like I said, we'll make sure people get the results. My final question for both of you, and we're running up on time, so I'll make this a lightning round question, is I want to talk about reforming this program. I think somewhere I read over 70 million Americans depend on the program, Social Security. How important is it that if we fix this has to be a bipartisan fix? And Stephen, I asked that to you in the sense of the results you saw. And Mark, I asked that to you in sort of a policy-making sense, given the fact of, we live in this very polarized era right now. So Stephen, let me turn to you, and then Mark, I'll give you the final word.
Yeah, it's just so tempting in a political context to, if anybody makes a move in the direction of taking any of these steps that involve some kind of pain, it's just so tempting for someone on the other side, whether in the context of a primary or in a general election, to go, they want to cut your benefits. They want to raise the retirement age. They want to raise your taxes, right? And it's just almost irresistible. What's more challenging is to bring everybody into a kind of problem-solving mode and say, what are the trade-offs? Now, I think it's really important, and the only way you're probably going to get through this is to bring the public to the table, because it's just because each side, each politician is going to just be too nervous. So it's really critical that politicians be able to say, the people are saying that we should take some of these difficult steps, and I concur with that. And it's also not seeing the public as just sort of this morass of emotions and desires, and only thinking about their own pocketbook and all that kind of stuff. That they, because that's really not true. They can, as we have seen, they can reason, they can understand. And the founder said it's the reason of the people that should govern. And I think if you bring the reason of the people to the table, it gives the cover for the politicians. And without that, I think it's just going to be too tempting for them to keep going gotcha every time anybody takes a move toward taking some of the difficult steps.
Mark, final word to you.
Sure. I mean, look, I don't think that Social Security reform has to be bipartisan for it to work, but I don't think there's any way to get to Social Security reform that is not bipartisan. First of all, you need 60 votes in the Senate. Secondly, you need the other team not gunslinging at you with every weapon they have, right? And so even if we got rid of the filibuster and restricted it to 50 votes, it's hard to imagine there's 50 support unless there's some kind of bipartisan agreement. When we've done this in the past, reform Social Security, it's either been on a bipartisan basis or at a time that one party had a massive majority. In the rare cases we've done Social Security reforms, they've almost all been bipartisan in both expanding the program. And in 1983, for example, when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill came together, with Bob Dole and Moynihan and others to fix it. I'll also give a shout out that some of our leaders, including Senator Mitt Romney and Joe Manchin, and many others, have supported a bill called the Trust Act, which would create commissions for all the major trust funds, Social Security, Medicare, and Highway, and include this process. And I think adding sort of I think getting the public involved, whether it's in a formal advisory council or just an informal way, making sure that they're getting the input, I think would be a great addition to that. But that kind of process, I think, is going to be needed to get reform to the finish line.
Well, let me just take a moment and say, Stephen, Mark, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who joined us this afternoon. Like I said, next day or two, you'll be receiving a copy of this video and additional information. And again, we want to thank you so much for joining us and hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, everybody.